America has been plagued with unspeakable crimes and unexplained phenomena that have captured nationwide attention and intrigue, demanding answers and retribution. However, many of these mysteries never get explained. Mysteries to this day that are still thwarting the best efforts of countless law enforcement and investigative teams. Serial killers never identified. Treasures lost. Murderers never caught. And conspiracy upon conspiracy spinning into tangled webs of inconclusive evidence and unresolved truths. This compelling documentary series presents a countdown of America's 60 most notorious unsolved mysteries and crimes in a dramatic compilation revealing these unanswered questions in 10 fascinating episodes. Moving through America's 13 to 10 greatest unsolved mysteries and crimes, we encounter a secret society and two baffling tales of disappearance, an American hero, and a whole culture. Dan Brown's 2009 thriller, The Lost Symbol, takes on the world's most powerful and clandestine society, the Freemasons. A secret society of men with special handshakes and special phrases to identify fellow members. A secret society with mysterious rituals non-members joke about. But the Masons are not only a secret society. They are a society that fanatically guards a secret. A secret its members have closely guarded for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. A secret disguised by their strange rituals and mysterious symbols. A secret the Freemasons protect so fanatically that some believe their society lies at the heart of nearly every unsolved mystery, every infamous conspiracy that has happened in America in the last 300 years.
Well, I've heard a lot of theories about Masonic conspiracies, ranging everything from the Illuminati, that they started the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and they assassinated Lincoln and started the Civil War. The Masons supposedly were linked to, in some theories, to Jack the Ripper's murders in London, supposedly trying to cover up Prince Edward's marriage to a commoner. There have been various alleged Masonic insiders that have surfaced from time to time claiming that they pray to different pagan gods and so forth, and that if you get high enough in the organization, they take you aside and tell you that we actually worship Satan or something like that.
Fear of the Freemasons is a fear, I think, of a world order. The Freemasons are international. So I believe that many people are concerned about the idea that if they're this international body, they're not constrained by being American citizens because there's Freemasons in all these different countries. If you have this secret international organization that even if their ideas are for good, that it's a sort of an alternate power structure that scares some people. And I think the Freemasons say, oh, we're not a secret society, we're a society that has secrets. But I think secrets are somewhat terrifying to people. Anytime people have secrets, the public, or a certain percentage of the public, is going to think, okay, there must be even more. There must be something really bad in there that they don't want me to know about.
Truthfully, all we really know about the Freemasons is that the first Masonic lodges originated among the craft halls of Scotland during Europe's Age of Enlightenment. But some scholars believe their roots go back to ancient Egypt and the engineers who built the pyramids. Engineers who built monuments in ways no one 4,500 years later can figure out. As civilization spread north and west into Europe, the descendants of these early Masons went with it to Greece, Rome, France, and to England. And finally, 300 years ago, they came to America, a place isolated from Europe, a place where their secret society would finally be safe, a place where it could flourish. Curiously, America would ultimately become the world's greatest superpower, the world's bastion of democracy. A democracy many believe was founded and nurtured by the Freemasons.
Have Freemasons really been kind of secretly running America since America started? The evidence put forward would be all the people in the government that have been Freemasons, been part of this secret society. George Washington was a Freemason. Ben Franklin was a Freemason. 10 to 20 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. The Boston Tea Party is a Freemason-produced event. John Hancock and Paul Revere are both Freemasons, and the place where they're sort of getting up in their Indian drag, if you will, to go out and dump the tea off the ships is the Green Dragon Tavern, which is their Freemason meeting hall.
It isn't a far stretch to believe the Masons were responsible for founding America's democratic government. The most important founding fathers were Masons. George Washington, Ben Franklin, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, and John Adams. And throughout America's turbulent history to the present day, America's most powerful men have been a who's who of Masons. Presidents James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Warren G. Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Gerald Ford, Supreme Court Justices John Marshall and Earl Warren, and leading merchants and businessmen Henry Ford and IBM's founder Thomas Watson. Even our national anthem was written by a Mason, Francis Scott Key. It's only natural for the Masons to have men in positions of power to protect the Masons' closely guarded secret, to go to any lengths necessary to ensure it is never revealed. So what secret would be so great that it would cause a group to cross a dangerous ocean and set up camp in harsh, primitive wilderness just to create a government dedicated to protecting that secret? Well, no one who isn't a high-degree Mason knows. The secret is hidden away among Freemason rituals and symbols, including the all-seeing eye with the pyramid, the United States seal, the compass, the square, and the level. even the city streets of Washington, D.C. itself.
Many people believe that the streets of Washington are designed in the Freemason arc and compass and represent secret symbols inside the street plan of Washington.
These are rituals and symbols that only the most adept, the highest echelon of Masons, are allowed to learn. Rituals and symbols that are explained only when one has studied and proven himself to be worthy. Supposedly, they are keys to the great mystery that lies at the heart of Freemasonry. A mystery they are willing to die for, to kill for. Something that has made Masons one of the most feared secret societies in America. In 1826, William Morgan found out just what it meant to go up against the Masons.
William Morgan in upstate New York is kidnapped and widely believed to have been murdered by the Freemasons. He had threatened to reveal Freemason secrets. And the result of his kidnapping is this huge rise in anti-Freemasonry. So people then become convinced that he's been kidnapped and killed. He was killed for revealing the secrets. The Freemasons are trying to keep these secrets to the point of death.
So, American Freemasons guard a secret. Guard a secret no matter what it takes. Is it a secret that, if revealed, would shock the human race? Shock it so much that chaos would reign and civilization as we know it would crumble? Or is it a secret that would free humanity and usher in a golden age of peace and prosperity? Are American Freemasons benevolent caretakers, guarding us against ourselves, helping humanity to survive? To find out, you'll have to join a very exclusive, very secretive society and prove yourself. And then see if you dare tell the world. In America's four-corner region of the desert Southwest lie the ruins of America's oldest, most advanced ancient civilization, the Anasazi. The Anasazi's intricate, superbly built cliff cities are equal to the wonders of the ancient world, equal to the splendor of the Egyptian pyramids and the beauty of the Mayan temples. But while we know a lot about the ancient Egyptians and the Maya through their descendants, the Anasazi's descendants are nowhere to be found. All we are left with is a great mystery. What happened to this advanced race? Where did the Anasazi go?
The Anasazi are probably one of the biggest mysteries of the Southwest because no one knows for sure who they were, what they did, other than leave behind these pretty elaborate ruins. They obviously had a very large civilization which has been dated back to before the Aztecs, but they've been gone for so long that even the Indian tribes in the middle 1800s had no idea who they were.
When the Anasazi vanished, all they left behind were their spectacular cities, exquisite pottery, and their mystifying kivas. As a result, they left us a mystery so puzzling that scientists and archaeologists have been unable to solve it for centuries. Who were the Anasazi? And did they vanish into thin air? Everything about the Anasazi is mysterious. Even their name is from a Navajo word meaning ancient enemies. Where they came from is another mystery no one can answer. Many even claim they were aliens. All that is known is that the Anasazi arrived suddenly in the desert Southwest's Four Corners region, sometime around the birth of Christ. The area is a dry and harsh environment, hardly capable of supporting life. Hardly a place to call home or build an empire. Yet, for some reason, the Anasazi thrived.
I think the greatest accomplishment of the Anasazi during their golden age is that they flourished. They weren't just living, they flourished in an area that has always been challenging to live in environmentally. You know, the American Southwest today is an arid landscape with scattered resources, and these folks did it in a way that I don't think is replicated anywhere in North America. They really did something special. They were able to put up architectural monuments, if you will, that exist 1,000 years later, 1,200 years later, 1,500 years later, that are still there for archaeologists to find.
So how could these people flourish in an environment modern-day people find nearly impossible to live in? And how could they build large, thriving cities at Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, and Mesa Verde, Colorado, without sophisticated tools and machinery? The Anasazi didn't even have the wheel. Some archaeologists, like Steve Nash, think they have the answer.
The Pueblo buildings are made out of resources that you can find on the landscape. These folks were using sandstone chunks of various sizes to make walls, in some cases at least 3 feet thick. And they were stone masons, probably, who specialized in doing nothing but what we would today call bricklaying. What did they do for their roofing materials? This is where, to me, it gets interesting, because they used trees, and they used trees of different sizes in a perfectly logical arrangement for rectangular rooms. They would get the large beams, the large trees for doing the cross beams, and then they'd use smaller trees for the next layer, and then they would use smaller branches or grasses and then put mud on top. The trick is, where do you get trees in the American Southwest? You can drive around through Monument Valley, through Mesa Verde land, through Chaco Canyon land, through southeastern Utah, and trees aren't all that common. You find them in the mountains. The people that were living in Chaco Canyon about 1,000 years ago, just over 1,000 years ago, were making gigantic structures. And one of these structures, Chetroketl, has got 250,000 trees in it. Where'd they get them? They got them from at least 50 miles away at the Chusca Mountains. And we know this from looking at the chemical composition of the tree rings in the wooden beams that are still found there, because the chemical composition matches the chemical composition of the trees in the Chusca Mountains. How were they getting those trees from 50 miles away? They didn't have draft animals, so they didn't have horse-drawn carts. They didn't have the wheel. They carried those things or floated them down a river. But it's a huge labor investment that we're talking about. And many times today, people will think about these folks were eking out a living and scratching out resources from the landscape. These folks had free time, and they had the ability to focus, to concentrate resources. Somebody was inducing probably young men to spend a great portion of their adulthood doing nothing but transporting beams from 50 miles away.
Though the explanation sounds convincing, would human beings really choose to live in such a harsh environment when they could easily move someplace less forbidding? Why stay in the desert unless there was something special about this region? And that brings us to the heart of the Anasazi mystery. Where did they go? Perhaps the answer lies in the Anasazi's cliff cities. In their unique underground ceremonial rooms called kivas. Kivas were said to possess mysterious powers. They were portals to other worlds, other places. If this is true, perhaps these kivas are part of the answer to the mysterious disappearance of the Anasazi civilization only 700 years ago. And perhaps these kivas are also the key to how the Anasazi created such a sophisticated culture, a culture far ahead of its time. and a way of governing unlike any in the ancient world.
I think most archaeologists would agree that there weren't kings or rulers in the sense of the European or Old World model, or even Mexican and South American models. But there were clearly people who held special power. We could call them priests.
Then, at the height of their civilization, they left as mysteriously as they appeared, without a clue of where they went or even how they managed to disappear. Most historians believe the Anasazi simply abandoned their cities and merged with the more primitive Indians in the area. But does this sound plausible? Would an advanced culture leave luxury and comfort to live primitively? Some historians say the reason lies in that the Anasazi were forced out of their homes by a death-wielding plague, the loss of trade, a civil war, or a massive drought. All of these ideas sound plausible, but there are problems with these theories.
Could there have been a massive epidemic? But again, there were no signs of mass graves. Could there have been a disruption of the trade? But there was no sign that the Anasazi depended on trade. Could the Anasazi have turned against each other? There were some, archaeologists have found some signs of cannibalism. But again, that wouldn't explain why are there no mass graves, and why didn't the victors stay on?
They can't find any archaeological evidence to say that any of these theories are actually valid. That, I think, is probably what makes it a mystery we'll never be able to solve.
So if conventional theories don't work for these unconventional people, what else is left?
There are a lot of theories, again, as to what may have happened. The more outrageous ones, of course, are that they vanished into the ether, taken them to the heavens by the gods. And there are a lot of people who believe that maybe UFOs picked them up and carried them away, and maybe that's who brought them here in the first place.
Perhaps one day they will come back. Come back to their magnificent cities, still waiting for their return. Where did she go?
The story of Amelia Earhart is one of the biggest mysteries of all time. People are fascinated with her because she was such a pioneer. She was one of the first really famous women aviators. She would have been the very first woman to fly around the world if she'd actually made it. The fact that she disappeared without a trace on her way to Howland Island in the South Pacific, I think is really what has kept her story alive, because we'll never know what happened.
Amelia Earhart was America's darling. She was daring, beautiful, outspoken, witty, and perhaps the greatest thrill seeker of all time. She broke into the news headlines in 1932 when she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. Duplicating Charles Lindbergh's extraordinary feat earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross and the dashing nickname Lady Lindy. It also made her an instant celebrity, the world's second biggest celebrity after Lindbergh. Being in the limelight was something she liked, and she would take even greater risks to maintain her popularity. Until she decided to attempt the most daring feat of all, to become the first woman to circumnavigate the globe, which in her own words was, "One flight which I most wanted to attempt, a circumnavigation of the globe as near its waistline as could be." It was the risk of a lifetime, the greatest risk imaginable in flying at that time. But from the beginning, Earhart had always pushed the envelope. At age 24, as a brand new pilot, she crashed her first plane just after she bought it. During her solo flight across the Atlantic, she pushed her Lockheed Vega into a tailspin, recovering only a few feet above the waves. And on her first attempt to circumnavigate the globe, she ground looped her plane on takeoff and crashed. On May 21, 1937, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, took off from Oakland, California in their Lockheed Electra to circle the globe. 40 days later, she made her final touchdown at Lae, New Guinea. Only the last, most dangerous leg of the journey remained. The 7,000 miles across the vast Pacific Ocean. Her final takeoff, a takeoff that would result in the biggest search the world had ever seen, happened at midnight on July 2, 1937. Hours later, her final message crackled across the airwaves.
We are on line of position 157-337. We are running north and south.
One of the last legs crossing the Pacific, she was making this very long flight across open water, trying to land on a small island, Howland Island. Of course, she disappears before she ever gets there.
We have a vast, vast area of the ocean out there, but so many people searched for these ships just for weeks and weeks for any trace of the plane. She was last heard on the radio on her way to the island, and then that was the last anybody ever heard. Some people claimed or believe that maybe she landed on another island somewhere. Some pieces of wreckage from an old plane were found on a nearby island, that maybe she died there, but that doesn't explain why nobody found her while the search was going on. No trace was ever found of her plane anywhere around the island in the water. Probably one of the biggest stories that have made the rounds is that she was actually a spy working for Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1937.
One of the more intriguing theories surrounding the disappearance of Earhart is that she and her navigator Fred Noonan were spies, that her round-the-world trip was really just a pretext for taking pictures of Japanese installations in the Pacific.
Was the daring Amelia spying on the Japanese for the United States?
She was a close friend of the Roosevelts, and many believe that while she was on this flight, she was actually spying on the Japanese, who were building up their naval fleet, prior to World War II, and that she may have been shot down and captured by the Japanese. And maybe that's what happened to her, because again, there were stories that circulated that there was a white woman who had been captured and was being held prisoner by the Japanese prior to World War II.
There were all sorts of reports from Pacific Islanders who supposedly had seen Earhart and Noonan alive after the crash. There were even reports that Earhart had become the infamous wartime disc jockey Tokyo Rose. That was completely unsubstantiated.
Most people assumed that she just crashed in the ocean, but I think the latest theory that she may have seen too much flying across the Pacific in 1938 and caught the Japanese fortifying some island bases where they weren't supposed to be, and that she may have been shot down or forced to land somehow and then taken prisoner and executed later so that it would avoid embarrassment of having kidnapped her. But I don't think that's something that will ever be proved now at this late date. I mean, if she really was held prisoner on Saipan 7 years before the American invasion, I doubt there would be any recognizable remains.
I think what went wrong here is that Amelia Earhart was just way overly ambitious. She and her husband, George Putnam, wanted publicity. They needed it to kind of keep the money machine going. Amelia Earhart's career is as much about showmanship as it is about flying, and I think maybe she just overreached herself a little too much on this. It's a great, the sequence at the very end in the last communications with her, they're trying to communicate with this Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, and they're calling on one frequency and the Itasca's telegraphing back at another frequency and they're not hearing it, and they're trying to get them to change frequencies and to do all this stuff to try to figure out where they should be going. And you get the sense that the whole thing, is kind of being done on a wing and a prayer with a little baling wire and chewing gum, and it was an accident waiting to happen. I don't really, there have been a lot of expeditions trying to find Amelia Earhart's remains, and they've found bits and pieces and this and that and the other thing. But the truth is, the Pacific is a big ocean, and those islands are really, really tiny. And if you don't get where you're going, the chances are really good, they're about 99.99% that the place you're going to end up, if you don't find the place you're going, is open water, 3 miles deep to the bottom, and good luck.
She's one of those people, I think, that the fascination is never going to go away, because I don't think we'll ever know for sure what happened. My guess is, if I had to guess, the plane probably just went down somewhere, and we've never found it because it's just so many miles of ocean that will never be covered. And chances are that that's actually what became of Amelia Earhart.
Would she spy for the government? Of course, the ultimate risk-taker would. We'll never know the truth of what happened to Amelia. But this is one mystery that won't ever go away. It is the holy grail of aviation to find out what happened to Amelia Earhart.
Of the most famous trials of the 20th century, Sacco and Vanzetti, the Rosenbergs, Alger Hiss, O.J. Simpson, the Lindbergh case stands out for its lack of political significance. This was not a case about race. This was not a case about politics. And yet it gripped America at least as firmly as any of those other cases. You had hot dog vendors lining the street where the body was found. You had sightseeing planes circling the scene of the crime. You had 12,000 people writing to the Lindberghs just to tell about their dreams about the kidnapping.
In 1932, Charles Lucky Lindbergh was America's most well-known and most beloved man. An aviation hero, high in the pantheon of America's super aviators. The Wright brothers, Amelia Earhart, Chuck Yeager, and Neil Armstrong. 5 years earlier, in the now famous Spirit of St. Louis, Lindbergh made the first solo transatlantic flight from New York to Paris. Following his triumph, he embarked on a whirlwind nationwide tour, visiting all 48 states and 92 cities. He delivered 147 speeches. When the tour ended, Lindbergh wrote the acclaimed We, a memoir of his record-setting transatlantic flight. The world's first superstar, he hobnobbed with the rich and famous. His views were sought on everything. That same year, he met the beautiful and intelligent Anne Morrow. She was the only woman that he had ever asked out on a date. Their courtship became America's romance, and in 1929, they were married. The following year, they began their family with the birth of their first child, Charles Lindbergh Jr. And then the unimaginable happened. On March 1st, 1932, the nursemaid, Betty Gow, put 20-month-old Charles Lindbergh Jr. in his crib in an upstairs bedroom. Sometime in the next 20 minutes, it happened. Somebody took the baby.
Somebody used the ladder and got into the window, took the baby, and probably trying to keep the baby from crying, because it wasn't a tiny baby. It was a young enough child to be frightened by what was going on. My guess was they probably accidentally smothered him, trying to keep him quiet, taking him out of the lawn, it was a pretty big estate, and out into the woods. And then when they realized the baby was dead, tried to hide the body, but not wanting to give up on this score, they decided to play it out like they still had the baby, take the ransom money, and disappear. It just didn't work out that way.
At 10 p.m., Gow discovered that the baby was missing from his crib. Lindbergh raced to the nursery to see for himself. There he discovered a ransom note. Dear sir, have $50,000 ready. $25,000 in $20 bills, $15,000 in $10 bills, and $10,000 in $5 bills. After 2 to 4 days, we will inform you where to deliver the money. Frantic to get their son back, the Lindberghs paid the ransom. An intermediary gave the money to a mysterious man in a New York City cemetery. In exchange, he handed over a note saying that the Lindbergh son was being held on a boat called the Nellie at Martha's Vineyard. The child was supposedly in the care of 2 women who, according to the note, were innocent. Lindbergh went there and searched the docks. However, there was no boat called the Nellie. A desperate Lindbergh even flew a plane low over the boats in an attempt to startle the kidnappers into showing themselves. After 2 days, Lindbergh admitted he had been duped. Then the worst happened. On May 12, 1932, delivery truck driver William Allen discovered the corpse of a toddler only 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home. Allen notified the police, who took the body to a morgue in nearby Trenton, New Jersey. A distraught Charles Lindbergh identified the body as his kidnapped son. For 2 years, the police searched for the kidnappers. They found nothing. Then a German immigrant, Bruno Hauptmann, was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr.
My guess is they wanted to hurry this thing along and get it over with and bring an end to this whole ordeal that had gone on for a year.
In a trial that was held from January 2nd to February 13th, 1935, Hauptmann was found guilty as the sole murdering kidnapper and sentenced to the death penalty. He was executed by electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison on April 3rd, 1936. Case closed, right?
And yet Hauptmann proclaimed his innocence right up until his death. Even when the governor of New Jersey offered to convert the death sentence to life in prison in return for a confession, Hauptmann refused.
Hauptmann might have been, just a scapegoat for the whole thing if there weren't things that tied him to it. See, that's the problem I have with it. I think there was enough evidence to show that he was linked to this kidnapping in some way, not the least of which was the wood from the ladder that was built right out of his garage, was built using that wood. It seems hard for me to believe that somebody could have torn all the wood out of his garage and built a ladder out of it without him knowing about it. Now, did he know what they were doing with it? Maybe not. The fact that this friend of Lindbergh's who tried to make this ransom drop to this mysterious man in the cemetery and identified as Hauptmann's voice, could he have been mistaken? Sure, it's possible. It could have been another man with a German accent, and that's all he heard and maybe assumed that it was Hauptmann. So it's possible that he could have been just, the whole thing pinned on him. But I honestly do think he was involved in some way.
The Lindbergh kidnapping fascinates me for 2 reasons, and one is that I personally believe that Hauptmann was framed for the crime and that he was innocent. And the other thing that intrigues me is that they could never actually prove that the Lindbergh child was killed per se. The supposed corpse of the Lindbergh baby was discovered a good number of days after the kidnapping in an area that had already been searched a couple of times. As I recall, a trucker stopped to relieve himself or something and found this corpse in an area fairly near the home where search parties had already been through. And it was so decomposed at that time that the Lindbergh's pediatrician allegedly said he could not identify the corpse as Charles Lindbergh Jr. if someone offered him $1 million. It doesn't mean it wasn't the Lindbergh baby, but the identification certainly is unsure. Years later, when they finally got Hauptmann, there's no doubt that some of the evidence against him was manufactured. For example, they claim that they found, well, they did find Lindbergh's phone number penciled inside Hauptmann's closet, but a reporter for one of the New York tabloids later admitted that he wrote it there so that he could get the exclusive story. Some of the boards supposedly ripped up from Hauptmann's attic to build the ladder didn't really match as far as the nail holes and so forth. I think there was a frame up by the New Jersey State Police to try to clear the books on the case. And FBI files that have surfaced since that time even indicate that J. Edgar Hoover himself thought some of the evidence was very iffy. But of course somebody had to fry for it, and Hauptmann's story about getting the money from Isidore Fish, who was then already dead in Europe and couldn't be questioned, left him hanging out there in the breeze.
There were stories that circulated that the body that was found in the woods was not actually Charles Lindbergh Jr., that it was some other child that had been left out there, and that the real Lindbergh baby was carried away and never returned to the family. The ransom was never collected, that this child just sort of disappeared into history.
Many historians do suspect that Hauptmann did have help, that there was someone inside the Lindbergh house who helped him. Lindbergh didn't help matters. He did not let police question any of the servants in the house. Maybe this was because he'd been taken in by some of the con men who claimed to know the kidnapper. Maybe this was just because Lindbergh couldn't bear to imagine that someone in his household who he trusted had betrayed him. Whatever the reason, since the questions weren't asked then, we can't answer them now.
It could well have been an organized crime operation too. I know Al Capone tried to get himself out of prison by offering to find the kidnappers, and he was turned down because he was too notorious at the time. There was a lot of talk at the time that the underworld, some kind of bootlegging gang or something of that nature, might have been involved to try to make a big score. This was the same period when even gangs like Ma Barker's gang and so forth are switching over from bank robbery to kidnapping of prominent persons.
So the most famous trial of the 20th century undoubtedly is also the most famous mistrial of the 20th century.